Okay, hey, train your plants every day. Jordan Scoville coming at you from the S.T.E.M lab. Now, at some point in time here, I'm going to have to go through some level of a mental health evaluation for probation. Kind of one of the standard rigmaroles of just being on probation. That and drug and alcohol and things like that. At least once. I don't know, maybe more. We'll see how it all plays out, and we'll see how all that goes. Um, but this is one I've done before in other videos I've since taken down, and just to do them again, it's just good to get practiced with them. I'd like to talk about some ideas of how I feel about psychology. Now, I don't quite go to the level that some crazy maniac, the last one I saw on CNN or whatever it was, that doesn't necessarily believe in psychology. Remember, for me, I like physics. It's just the same level of analyzation. I use direct physics when applying somebody's group states as a general, or what's generally relative, what quantum gravity is going to be looking like for them in a given perspective. Even myself, it's how I base a lot of the calculations, a lot of the moves I make about how much mass or how much matter a given issue takes to help me gauge it out, to help me determine what the name is, to even the given definition, if you like, my S.T.E.M variable, on a lot of what that is. Now, again, the reality is it does. Psychology makes a lot of. I don't. Well, they went Jewish about it, like it's a Jewish invention. Well, look, so is mathematics, but not Jewish. It's a human invention. Firstly, you're going to group it all down to zero, and it's going to expand into any variable by a group state. And again, that's just made up of physical parts. Again, these are quantum gravities, they're wave functions that have, when you put enough pressure into them, a lot of particles are going to have to be named, and we're going to analyze them. So whether it's a group of people, whether it's a given function or what have you, it doesn't really matter to me. One of my favorite, and if you've been watching my tutorials on how to do a given flourish, remember I like to say mathematics is a lot like a fist fight. And how to set up your flourish, how to set up this card trick. There's nothing different in a magician that took the time to work all these functions out. They're their directives. It's in their psychological terms that base the physics to say the only reason A is A when we look at Spanish or Latin or any other variable is a social group, or a AB is BA in a G group, quantum gravity aspect of what's socially liberal. I should be able to have that same way of thinking about a thing. But I have come up with a couple of different forms of this, and I like to compare them to some of the generals that are already out there in terms of the group state. And for me, this is a bit of marshmallow experiment. This is a bit of the Warshak experiment, with the cards, Warshak. Again, for me, I look at that general model of it, and usually when somebody says it's a unicorn, it's a pretty butterfly, I've already criterialized you immediately into a group as what kind of analyzation. You're not taking this seriously. You're not using the information correctly. But this kind of opens that door to be a little bit different. This is that cave sense. All right, and it says that this enchanted creature, if you will, just bear with me here. This enchanted creature gets +1/+1 and has mountain walk. This is the mountain right here. These are again those calculations that you have to prepare for to climb Everest. Otherwise you're going to die halfway through this. The numbers are going to die for it. The functions are going to die for it. And for me, given I just quantum gravity of the universe here, a cold reading a little bit. It doesn't matter which one I would have pulled. I have a frame that I generally give, and that frame is very loosely set in quantum nature. It makes it jump to whatever I want it to be. Hand of Death can come off on this card, and that could be a positive effect. Remember, positive and negative here at the physicist level have to be calculated. I know the negative numbers while doing time charts at a stone dock or something like that, and that helps me positively affect a system in certain ways. That's how I play this game. No, I wouldn't always give that to somebody if they were in my case study or my S.T.E.M lab, or for whatever reason I was given a certain thing. I can always begin with marijuana and go right to recruiting speeches, physics, botany, arborist. If you wanted to make that jump to somebody for whatever reason, I just throw some stuff in there. You could easily do them, but it takes a general to know what's relative, what's quantum gravity, what are special relativity states, and how to specifically word them. A lot of this is being a ruler, measuring out 1 inch and getting somebody else to believe that. Now, a lot of times, again, I might agree with states. I'm very fairly well versed with a pretty good vocabulary, a good bank of terms in that. Stanford experiment, physics, quantum gravity, Warshak, the list goes on and on. Usually stuff really only starts to pop out. Spectrums and electrons, bosons, fermions, Higgs energies, for the field you're standing in. But this is an idea, when I pulled this card, it gives me an advantage. It becomes unblockable as long as the defending player controls this mountain. If they're putting that mountain in front of me, and I have that state figured out, it's going to allow me to traverse this terrain, this topology, a little bit more effectively. So I get them to pull this card. I ask them a specific set of questions. What do you see? And now you started a specific answer. Certain gravities are going to follow this. And they're not necessarily great answers, but it's going to help me analyze a whole bunch of stuff about their person, about their function. And again, I don't just use this as my given set. Remember, when I'm talking about that flourish, as a manager, managerial states are frames, they're cards, they're force is frame, is motion, is moment. 1, 2, in this given second. That when I say it as a Mason, you can basically know telepathy. I know when you're lying to me. I know some basic facial expressions. Do I always set those off in motion immediately at those sets? Sometimes I set them back, because that is the experiment. That is the thing that I invented, the marshmallow experiment, that I might apply to this given circumstance, X, to the question I ask, Y, to a specific degree function. So Z degree of what I'm trying to analyze. And again, it's not always force. You don't always want to crash through this wall. Sometimes it takes the Sun Tzu to tap every brick on this wall to figure out where the cracks are before you can take on a walled fortress like that, which can just be a regular person. No resources whatsoever, and you have to take that in mind. A lot about some Stanford experiment. What I was saying, it can be, if you go through those channels of it, very different. We'll get into drug and alcohol later, and what am I supposed to say? Well, do I have a problem? Well, does it depend on if I can move to a state where it's legal for recreational after this? Or if I had the right contracts, of whether it's truly a problem or not, when I start talking about the physical pieces of not only my psyche and my skills I've learned off of that state, but the form I reference that business in, and how I wanted to pay taxes to it and engineer systems of fully documenting that system. So I could make sure that the IRS and whoever else could truly document this and determine what tax dollars off of this. Is that where the problem come in? I'm sure it's a problem for a lot of people. But me, well, maybe. Demeanor is very important. Sometimes psychology will teach you. You got anger problems and you're just very passive aggressive. Sometimes you gotta stand out there and be a better person, and it takes somebody as a general to do that properly. Sometimes that's mandated through circumstances that the social liberty of a group says you're going to listen to this person. And I can't disagree with that statement in every constitutional based case. All I can do is analyze the physics and say, look, this is constitutional, this is not constitutional. Here I'm constitutionally obligated without being a terrorist or a revolutionist under that standard. I like the idea. I certainly would love to be. But is it always the best thing to do this without having all those calculations, little calculations weighed out about why you need to know the corn before you do this, or why I have to have an army to defend my corn garden, when in a time and a place, the given case, X, Y, and Z, general relativity, quantum gravity, to somebody's or something's direct physics, or even how a multiple group of a scenario can become a thing, one singular event that needs to be analyzed correctly. It takes a given command directive in this specific model. So, you could do things just, I have a lot of these. I've already worked out a lot of these. I can go through any model of them. Again, it's just easy here because managerial skills isn't something I'm doing because it's not necessarily brought into this conversation right yet. But Tormenting Voices is the card that I pulled here. So, I use them a lot like generals. What? Holy fucking crazy bastard. No. The reality behind a lot of this is when I hear a squeaky wheel or a gantry saw just, I know to get the hell out of the way. It's one of those things. There are some seriously bad things going on. I don't need somebody or this divine voice to kind of define that to me. It can help. You can have your own conscious, your own way of thinking about that calculation that can absolutely tear you apart, especially when you know these numbers. And a lot of the quantum nature of the universe is indifferent to this. It's one of those things that'll push you. The more psychology the harder it is to apply, the more mathematics you are. I work on a quantum field theory for this aspect. Says there's all these 0-point energies that are all universal field theory, and the NP problem will talk about the position of those things while determining a specific Young's mass gap to this specific aspect, this saw. Well, I know Ohm's law to talk about in the gantry saw. At some point that's in there, but when you drop that down to the quantum universe of a thing, Ohm's law is nothing. You have to figure out what the circuitry or the Hunter's Prize or mini a Bitcoin aspect of the matrixing system of this circuitry, transisting, resisting capacitor really looks like. And sometimes it can just be a card trick, or how you palm it, or how you handle it. That is a magician on the stage can absolutely reference the same command directives or same engineering skills, the same science technologies of a different form to look like. All those calculations can be an overwhelming aspect in some cases. Here we got Dragon Arch. I like this one. In their hunger for the arch's power, mages often forgot that it only makes the dragons easier to summon. It doesn't make them easier to control. When I know psychology, it doesn't make this any easier to control that effect. It's the quantum nature of this universe traveling infinitely, basis of mathematics, and all the forces I would have to, frames, I would have to psychologically base to qualify for, disqualify for, because as you're right, they're very qualified to do this. When I look at somebody that might have those skills, there'll be a lot of disqualifying features to that, sometimes as a manager or an owner of a company, or why you hire or don't hire somebody. It doesn't always make it easier to train those aspects either, given what gravities they have into this function. You can write out, I want somebody with 10 years experience or something like that, but that doesn't always make it easier to control whether that person is truly going to be apt to this circumstance or not, when you might be able to hire a rookie that doesn't know any of this stuff. You don't need any special containment procedures or anything like that to define, to talk about gravity. You just hopefully they're more of a general, at least an officer, to help them better explain this. Oh, all right. Back to that. We'll take these 3 cards because this is a gameplay scenario to a certain degree. Again, this is a game. When we talk about this in other forms and examples at the quantum level, or reality, not reality, it gets a little wonky. This is the one dimension, right? You can take your history, you can apply certain directions in front of that, but wherever they went, the Kildans transformed the land into a weapon. I understand that rock over there, a tree is on fire, right? It's, for me, it's talking to me in a bunch of different ways. It's a picture frame, it's a logging industry, that's quantum nature. Planck spectrum would be Planck gave a great quote for this before, whatever, he's dead now, that when you start to look at something, or see it squared, if you will, me adding that into that it will start to change. That when I look at that, it doesn't necessarily need to be that I need to build a rabbit trap. It's that I need to build a rabbit trap specifically here. Again, X, Y, and Z, the topography of this. When you understand topography, it's a great weapon in terms of understanding managerial skills. It's a great aspect. Again, it's flipped. If I was going to do this to somebody else, I'm trying to be positive for it. Not in every case. Sometimes, given a certain issue, I'll be like, well, the universe is trying to tell you something. if I thought I could handle that situation correctly. And I don't disagree with psychologists for doing that or any other aspect of it. Just a reflex. Here's how you win. You don't let the other guy hit back first. Catch you on the next one.